we have to talk about the new Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes Nature palette. This palette just launched at Sephora. This is Makeup by Mario's third Ethereal Eyes palette, and I was really excited about this one to come out. When I saw the promotional pictures being teased online for this palette, I just knew that I had to have it because the color scheme kind of reminded me of the original Ethereal Eyes palette. If you guys don't know, each of the Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes palettes are and have been limited edition. The original Ethereal Eyes palette came out a couple of years ago. It was so popular that he then relaunched it a year later. And then a year after that, which was last holiday season, he released the second Ethereal Eyes volume, which was called Moonlight. Now we are officially on to the third iteration of the Ethereal Eyes palettes, and this one is called Nature. Mario said that he was inspired by the shades that are within nature. A lot of these shades, as you can see, are more warm-toned neutrals. I feel like the one shade that sticks out is this one, which people are classifying as a green, but as we talk about this palette, I will say, while this shade does lean green, it's not, I mean, I wouldn't look at this palette and say it's a green palette by any means. To me, this is still just a beautiful, earthy toned, neutral palette. If you guys don't know anything about the Ethereal Eyes palettes, the reason they are so popular and have been so popular, I would say, is more so because of the formula and some of the special shimmery shades he has. This Ethereal Eyes Nature palette has 6 mattes and 6 shimmers, and actually let me rephrase that. I say that this palette has 6 mattes and 6 shimmers. I would say this shade up here is more like a satin. It has a matte base, but it does have those little micro sparkles in it, but for all intents and purposes, it works and acts and performs like a matte shadow. The other 2 Ethereal Eyes palettes actually had 7 mattes and 5 shimmers. So there is one extra shimmery type shadow in this new one. I was very curious to know how the new Ethereal Eyes Nature palette compared to the previous years, not just in formula, but also in shade range, especially that original one, because I have to say they seem like they would be pretty similar. So let me just jump into it. I'm gonna show you guys some swatches. So here we have the Ethereal Eyes Nature palette fully swatched out for you. I went ahead and grouped all of the mattes together and then swatched out all of the shimmers together just so you guys could see like next to like. The overall range of this palette is fairly good. You definitely have a decent amount of lights. You've got mostly medium tone shadows, and then you've got what I would consider one darker shadow. The actual texture of the shimmers in this palette is something I'm going to talk about a little bit more with you guys when we do the comparisons with the other palettes, but I do have to let you guys know that the shimmers in this palette are inconsistent one shade next to the other. There are a couple of shades that are really sparkly, and then there are a couple of shades which, if I'm being completely honest, I was kind of disappointed in texture-wise. They did not pick up very well on a brush. They do not deposit a decent amount of color or shimmer, if anything, and I just feel like that sparkly element that these Ethereal Eyes palettes are known for, I didn't find some of these shimmers really held up, and maybe you'll be able to see that next to some comparison swatches. So here are swatches of the Ethereal Eyes Nature palette next to the original Ethereal Eyes palette. Across the top of my arm, we have swatches of the matte shadows in the new Ethereal Eyes Nature palette, and on the bottom, I swatched out comparable matte shades from the original Ethereal Eyes palette. Hopefully you guys can see, while not all shades had a match, I just wanted to show you guys the range, the top row being the new palette and the bottom row being the original palette. And then here's a comparison of the shimmers. So again, across the top, we have the new Nature palette, and across the bottom, we have swatches of similar shimmer colors in the original Ethereal Eyes palette. Again, not all of the shimmers have a match. You can tell that, especially in this new palette, there are some more prominent colors, you know, like there's a little bit more of that green, you've got that true cranberry, but I just wanted to show you guys all of the shimmers next to each other. And then here are swatches of the Ethereal Eyes Moonlight palette next to the new Nature palette. So again, you have the Nature palette matte shades swatched across the top of my arm, and on the bottom, we have the matte shades in the Moonlight palette swatched. Again, I tried to do some comparable colors. Not everything had a match. The Moonlight palette you can see has quite a few blue toned, and this palette does lean cool toned overall. These two palettes I wouldn't say are similar at all, and you can see that even in the shimmers here. Again, we have the Nature shimmer shadows swatched across the top of my arm compared to the Moonlight shimmers across the bottom. And again, I feel like you can really tell in these swatches here, the Moonlight shimmers across the bottom really had that extra dimensional X factor glow to them. They were genuinely so special. Even if you didn't love a cool toned palette, I feel like these shimmers really were unique. And I just don't feel like the Ethereal Eyes Nature palette has any of that same extra dimensional shimmer. Another place I feel like this palette is kind of inconsistent is in the formulation of the mattes. Now, the Ethereal Eyes palettes overall are known for having more buildable colors, and that includes the mattes. The mattes are not supposed to go with like one swipe pigmentation. They are supposed to be a soft, buildable color, and I really did find that the case with the original Ethereal Eyes as well as the Moonlight. With this one, I would say the mattes are just a touch more pigmented, but I do think they're equally blendable. And actually, when I swatched all of the mattes next to each other, you could really distinctly tell a difference in the formulation. The original Ethereal Eyes palette mattes are much drier than these new ones. These mattes are almost like buttery, like they're really smooth and soft. They feel like flour in your fingers, versus the original Ethereal Eyes palettes. The mattes almost feel kind of dry. And I don't know if that formulation difference just has to do with the age of the original Ethereal Eyes palette that I have. It's possible that over the past couple years that I've had that palette, the mattes have slowly dried out just a touch. However, I do think they've reformulated. Like, I do think just overall, these are much smoother, much silkier, and I do really like them. Like, I do think these mattes are really pretty. Even just looking at them side by side, you can see the original Ethereal Eyes palette is honestly like a fairly light toned palette. If anything, I think this new Nature palette here has a bit more contrast in some of the shades. It has a bit more like mid-tone mattes. And the original Ethereal Eyes definitely leaned more pink. You could even see that in the swatches of them next to each other. A lot of these matte shades, especially on my skin tone, which is pretty warm, lean very pink, versus this Nature palette definitely leans more warm, more earthy. And I think especially with the mattes, my skin tone loves these mattes. And as much as I love these matte shades, I do have to be completely honest, the shimmers for me, I don't think quite hit like the original two Ethereal Eyes palettes. The only two that I really like are actually these two. It's this kind of coppery, bronzy, almost rose gold color, and then the green or green shade. I'm putting green in quotes because while the shade definitely leans olive green, like the shimmer in it is olive green, it doesn't have any type of really strong base color to it. So obviously the shimmer is gonna look green toned, but it's not gonna look crazy green. You know, it's like one of those safe greens for people who only go for neutrals. It's basically a neutral green, okay? It's as neutral on the spectrum of green. I also do quite like this cranberry shade down here. That one I would consider a little bit more of like a metallic shade. Again, it doesn't have that X factor multi-dimensional shimmer. The whole thing that makes these shimmers in these Ethereal Eyes palettes special is the fact that they are a thinner, extraordinarily sparkly shade that has a semi-translucent base color to it. The fact that none of these shimmers in here have too strong of a base pigment makes that actual sparkle element really pop on the eye. And I do have to say, again, the original Ethereal Eyes and the Ethereal Eyes Moonlight really do have that fun extra dimensional sparkle in those shimmer shades. And each of those palettes only has 5 sparkle shades. And I wonder if that has something to do with the fact that the sparkle shades we have in here don't quite have that extra dimension to them, because they gave us an extra shimmer shadow. And in case you guys don't know, shimmer and sparkly shadows tend to be more expensive to produce than matte shadows, just because those actual sparkles, like the actual pearls, are very expensive. So I imagine that the actual sparkly shadows that were in the original 2 Ethereal Eyes palettes were significantly more expensive than making any of the shimmers in this new palette. This palette retails for $69, which I think is the price of all of the Ethereal Eyes palettes. So if I had to guess, I'm just making a little conspiracy theory guess out here. My guess is that the manufacturing of these palettes has gone up in price quite a bit. Just with the fact that everything is going up in price, I imagine the raw materials of these formulas are going up in price. So I'm thinking in order to keep this palette at a $69 price point, they somewhat had to sacrifice on the quality of those shimmers. And that's not to say that they're not workable. Like, you can definitely work with them. You can still get a really, really pretty look out of this palette. I don't want that to get mistaken. But I think when you're doing a direct comparison from this new palette to either of the other Ethereal Eyes palettes, you can tell a distinct quality difference in those shimmer shadows in particular. The mattes do have a different formulation as well, as I mentioned, but I don't mind this matte formulation. I think it is just as good and you can get just as good of a look. But the shimmers, again, they don't have that extra dimensional sparkle, which just makes me a little sad. It makes me a little sad, and I don't think I really noticed it until I did that direct comparison of those shimmer swatches next to each other. And seeing the other 2 Ethereal Eyes palettes swatched out, I'm just like, oh, those are so pretty. Those are so pretty. And I really was hoping, for the sake of the people who didn't get their hands on that original Ethereal Eyes palette, I was hoping this would be a really good alternative, because again, it is a nice range of relatively neutral shades. Sure, you have a cranberry, sure, you have a quote unquote green, but for the most part, you can get some really beautiful, effortless, neutral looks out of this palette. I don't know if this palette is a replacement of the original Ethereal Eyes. I just have to say, I want that palette to come back, you guys. I want that original Ethereal Eyes palette to come back in the same way that it was originally. The reason I'm saying that is because I am really concerned that those shimmer prices have gone up exponentially, that in order for Mario to re-release that original palette, either the price of the palette is gonna have to go up or the quality of those shimmers is gonna have to go down. And I don't want either of those. I don't want either of those for us. So I'm just crossing my fingers that if that original Ethereal Eyes palette were to come out again, I still think you're better off getting that one. I don't know, you guys. Those shimmers did let me down a bit. They really did let me down just a little bit. So overall, would I recommend the new Ethereal Eyes Nature palette? I think if you don't have either of the other Ethereal Eyes palettes, I think you would still like this palette. I still think it's a beautiful, oh no, nail popping off right at the end of the video, you guys. We're just gonna put that to the side. Pretend like I have 10 nails and not 8.5. You guys notice the half over here? Yeah. This set has been hanging on for dear life, you guys. Okay, what was I even saying before my nail just decided to explode off of my thumb? I think if you guys don't have either of the other 2 Ethereal Eyes palettes, I think you would still appreciate this palette. If you need or want a new neutral palette in your life, I still think this is really pretty. The mattes are just stunning. The only place I feel like I'm somewhat sacrificing is in the shimmers, and that's only because I have the original Ethereal Eyes to compare it to. I think if you didn't have those to compare, I think you might still be happy with these shimmers. But do I think that this particularly stacks up with either of the other 2 Ethereal Eyes palettes? I personally don't. And that kind of makes me sad to say, because this might have been one of the most exciting holiday launches of 2025 for me. That's why I wanted to sit down here and do a whole review video on this palette individually, because I thought I was gonna come on here and rave about it. I thought I would be able to show you guys comparison swatches to the other two Ethereal Eyes palettes, and I thought I would be able to tell you guys, if you didn't get your hands on original Ethereal Eyes, here's an amazing alternative. And while I think it's a okay alternative, I don't think it stacks up. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that that's the way this video went, you guys. That's not what I wanted. Oh well, it is what it is. I'm glad I got to take one for the team. I'm glad I got to test it for the rest of us. Let me know in the comments down below, did you guys get your hands on this palette? I also wanted to give a quick shout out to my friend Christina, or by Christina Studio here on YouTube. She did an amazing review video on this palette. She even did 6 different looks with this palette. So for those of you guys who have your hands on it and want some inspiration with different looks to do, her video is so thorough and so detailed, and I highly recommend you guys check her out. But other than that, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you guys enjoyed this old school beauty review, and I will talk to you in my next video very soon. I'll see you then. Bye.